Williams. Chris Williams is a longtime environmental activist, and I might add an activist in a whole variety of things. He's a member of ISO, the International Socialist Organization from New York. He is also a professor of physics, and he has published a book called Ecology and Socialism, Solutions to Capitalist Ecological Crises. He publishes regularly also in the International Socialist Review, and hot off the press, new article which we all should be reading, and I say that not having read it, but seeing what it's about. It's about the topics that we're talking about here. It's in Capitalism, Climate and Capitalism, in the most recent edition, and it's called Strategic Tactics in the Environmental Movement. Okay, and he's talking about what are the politics that we're going to go forward with, and what are the politics that are currently going on. So, with no further ado, Chris Williams.
Thanks very much. The reason I put this up is because it's...
Do you need help with the button?
Can you help me out? Thanks very much. The reason that I put this up is just because, this is from today. And so it's one of the 350 organized demonstrations. There were over 300 people down on Wall Street today, along with people from System Change, Not Climate Change. Basically drawing a line around where Wall Street is going to be underwater in the next 40 or so years. So hopefully pretty soon, because I actually picked this up. This is from this week. I don't normally buy the Daily News, but on the front cover here it's NASDAQ hack. He breached site in just 10 minutes. Evildoers could wreak havoc. And I was thinking, yeah, you think the evildoers only just got there? Anyway, I was thinking about that, and then, you know, some of the solutions that capitalism comes up with for how we're going to overcome the economic crisis. What do we need to do? And so this is the front cover of the New York Times a little while ago, saying that the way out of this crisis, if we're not shopping enough, if we're not consuming enough, if our economy is not growing, how can we get it going? This is their answer. On the macro kind of level, what we need to do is expand further. So if you go to the, thank you. This is what they would like us to turn our children into. I don't know whether you can read that, but this is a photo I took the other day because I was astonished at the depths to which capitalist advertising would go. If you can't see it, it says customer in training, and obviously they're child-sized carts, just to make sure that we're beginning the indoctrination process as early as possible. And just to give you one stat on the insanity of this system and the tremendous waste and the way in which we can reappropriate that for productive uses, the amount spent on advertising in this country alone is $1 trillion. That is twice what is spent on all education, public and private, from kindergarten through graduate school. What a tremendous waste of human potential, a tremendous waste of resources. And you think about the students going into debt and more debt and further debt and so on, and then they're squandering $1 trillion on total uselessness, convincing us to buy things that we don't even actually need. Go ahead. And so, you know, some of this some of today has been kind of depressing, right? A lot of bad things are happening, and clearly we need some kind of new paradigm for how to organize and move forward. And I think, you know, I just wanted to say that the people who organized and set up this day of coming together and trying to discuss equally social justice questions along with ecological justice questions is a huge step forward. There's over 300 people registered today, and I think that that is a real step forward. Even to have a Green Party member, an anarchist, and a revolutionary socialist on the same panel. think is pretty good. In the meantime, if you actually did think that you were suffering from capitalism, you're probably right, because this is the Financial Times from yesterday. J.P. Morgan is fined 920 million over London whale fiasco, as if that's even a lot of money for J.P. Morgan Chase. They have no problem paying that. And this is Time from this week, actually. How Wall Street won. Because none of the supposed re-regulation of Wall Street has actually happened. And so just going back to waste, I mean, there's the insane waste of the Pentagon, and this is something that environmentalists obviously need to be talking about a lot more. The military as the single biggest polluter on the planet, not to mention death machine, has to be tackled. And if we're not talking about a massive reduction and ultimately an abolition of the US military, then we're not really being serious on a social level and certainly not on an ecological level. But a lot of people think, well, we've got to reduce waste. The thing is about capitalism, waste is not a sign of malfunction. It's not a sign that things are going wrong. Waste is actually a sign of the success of capitalism. More waste equals better capitalism. Because the problem with this system is it's actually too productive. We make so much stuff, right, even though we're working all the time, that we actually could go back to producing a lot less and have a much higher standard of living. When you're talking about, everybody in the United States eats meat every meal, well, what about the 1 in 6, according to the Census Bureau, last year, Americans who went without food at some point during that year and didn't have enough? That's 50 million people. The fact is that America, United States, produces enough food to give every single American 8 plates a day. So where is that food going? Half of it is obviously wasted. And that's not just about the food, it's not just about the animals, it's not just about the plants. It's also about the water and the other resources, the energy, the fertilizer, the oil that goes into it. Just one statistic on the insanity that is capitalism. For every 1 calorie of food produced under this system within industrialized agriculture, it takes 10 calories of oil to do it. So talk about an unsustainable system, and there you have agriculture, which is supposed to be one of the most fulfilling things that we have. I mean, when you think about all the stories going back through human culture over thousands of years, the idea of breaking bread together is something fundamental to human society. The idea that we share things that is so integral to our life and the way in which we think about putting things inside our body has been completely undermined and bastardized by fast food, to name just one thing. But 1 in 5 Americans eat at least one meal off their laps on a consistent basis because everybody's running somewhere to get somewhere else. And so, I was glad to see that we had some food here at the conference, another great thing, because we also need to form, as Richard was saying, communities amongst ourselves to build up trust and to be able to see that it's not us fighting each other. We are actually fighting a much worse system around us. And so I am here to say that we need a revolution.
Yeah.
The reason I say that is for some of the things that we've talked about, but also for the fact on the positive side of things, we're talking about building an anti-capitalist coalition, right, to take on the whole might of capitalism. And then they ask you, well, what are you for? Well, for the survival of humanity, right? Yeah. Yeah. I'm for humanity. That's what I'm for. But when you read and about what the capitalists are saying they want, let me just quote from Forbes just this week. Harry Binswanger. Here's a modest proposal. Anyone who earns $1 million or more should be exempt from all income taxes. Yes, It's too little, and the real issue is not financial, but moral. So to augment the tax exemption in an annual public ceremony, the year's top earner should be awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. He goes on, imagine the effect on our culture. Yeah. Particularly on the young. If the kind of fame and adulation bathing Lady Gaga attached to the more notable achievements of, say, Warren Buffett, or if the moral praise showered on Mother Teresa went to someone like Lloyd Blankfein, who in guiding Goldman Sachs toward billions in profits has done infinitely more good for mankind. That's Forbes magazine. And so this is where they are. Or this is this week's Economist. You probably can't see it from here. Hang on, how economic growth will help prevent extinctions. So, what does it say? It says, I'll quote, over the past few centuries, mankind's economic growth has caused many of the problems that other species face. But as our special report this week argues, greater human prosperity now offers other species their best chance of hanging on. And who's going to help? Who's going to actually be doing this? It may surprise you, thanks very much, to who's going to be actually saving humanity through this economic growth. Quote, when people start to reach middle income level, other species start to benefit. That is partly because as people get richer, their interests begin to extend beyond necessities towards luxuries. For some people, that means expensive shoes. For others, that's a day's bird watching. So in other words, not only this is not only is more economic growth the answer, right? But how lucky is that for the economists? The rich people are the ones who are going to save the planet. There's a whole other load of things that I could go through. But in the Financial Times recently, the chief economist of Citibank was arguing that water should be the next global phenomenon as an asset class. So he says there will be different grades and types of fresh water. Writing in chief CEO of Citibank, writing in Financial Times. Just the way we have light, sweet, and heavy sour crude oil today, water will be the asset class, in my view, eventually the single most important physical commodity-based asset class, dwarfing oil, copper, agricultural commodities, and precious metals. So they're already thinking about, well, how are we going to further privatize everything else on the planet? And I'm not even going to go into the Obama charade, which has come out today with the regulations on coal, which is an absolute farce. The idea that they're going to regulate only future coal plants with a technology that doesn't exist yet, and they're going to give them 7 years to implement it anyway, is a complete joke. And in fact, Gina McCarthy, head of the EPA, let that out of the bag just today when she said, I believe the proposal that they're putting forward, rather than killing future coal, actually sets out a pathway forward for coal to be part of the diverse energy supply in the future. So that is from the head of the EPA, who just got back from her busy schedule awarding an environmental prize to Raytheon, of all people, which specializes in missiles, land, air, water, and space. In fact, prides itself on being the world's premier missile maker. And so they won a Climate Leadership Award. And it was presented by her. So anyway, thinking about all of these things, I think we have to really address the question of what kind of society and what kind of world do we really want to live in? Because we know that the world is now on track, and it just came out a little while ago, that by 2050, they're going to be needing to spend about $1 trillion a year just keeping our cities safe. New Orleans, New York, and others. And we also know that if this continues, that not everybody suffers equally from these kind of environmental disasters, right? In LA, if you're African American, you are twice as likely to die in a heat wave as if you're white. And we know that after the riots of the 1960s, they rebuilt parts of LA, and they didn't just do it on the basis of thinking about, well, how are we going to get people around in cars and forcing people into that mode of transportation. They also thought about how do we keep the poor people and the people of color from burning down the center of LA again. So you can also put a map to LA and look at the outline and the map of where the freeways and overpasses and so on are, and see them as moats, right? They're there to protect the rich from everybody else. And so you also look at LA, and it's one of the cities in this country that over a third of the landmass of LA is non-residential parking. So you're not driving your car maybe around, on average in the United States, 90% of the time. So 90% of the time the car is just sitting there, right, doing nothing, except it's already created a massive ecological devastated area because of the runoff, the concrete manufacture, the water, etc., etc., etc. How would we redesign cities? Not to be designed for cars, built for cars, because we don't actually know what a city would look like if it was built for us, right? It's built for the machines that they make us drive around in ones in, which are, you know, but you put a gallon of gas in your car, only 25% of that is actually used to make the car run. The other 75% just goes as heat. So it's not surprising that cities are far hotter than the surroundings. And so when we think about this, this level of disconnection that Richard was talking about, alienation in the Marxist sense, the fact that we live separated off from each other, something that Marx called the dot-like isolation of capitalism, which I think is a really great phrase for how we think about ourselves as individuals as the most important thing, and there is no such thing as society, to quote Margaret Thatcher. She's dead. That was a big party. You know, how do we rethink things in terms of community? And it's certainly true that we are also. Marx talked about the need to overcome the metabolic rift. Yes. And at the time, the word metabolism was in fact a brand new word. It only just recently been invented to talk about an individual cell in science. Things come in, things go out, you use energy, you produce waste. Marx, what was revolutionary about the way that Marx used the word metabolism and the metabolic rift was he was talking about the whole of society. And there was a metabolic rift created between what comes in and what goes out under capitalism, because capitalism is a linear system, right? All along the line, from the mines all the way to the consumer when they buy something, waste comes out at every location. It is completely linear. And as Barry Commoner, perhaps one of the first eco-socialists, wrote a book called The Closing Circle. How do we go back to what is more natural in nature, in the world, which is how do we reuse the waste that we produce, and how do we think about that? But obviously none of that is worthwhile unless we're talking about not just the question of ecology. And actually the whole word environment is problematic because it posits something that is outside of us, as if we are separate, which is what ecology is much preferred. Because then we embed ourselves within the thing that keeps us alive, i.e. the biosphere. But how would we reimagine our lives if we were to overcome that rift that says animals are separate from plants, right? We have animals one place, we have plants somewhere else, and then humans live somewhere else as well. And then if we can offshore our industry, we'll do that too. How can we reintegrate all of those things, as Richard was saying, so that we actually know what it really means to see an animal, alive or dead or killed or butchered, and how do we think about growing stuff so that we can actually move forward, thanks, and know how to garden, right? Know what it means to do those things. And there is a sense in which, you know, there was a recent article, I was going to quote from it, but I don't have time. Are you worse off than a medieval peasant? And medieval peasants, right? And by now you probably think, yes, I maybe am. And it's, in many ways you'd be right, because medieval peasants only worked about 150 days a year. The United States has no national vacation policy at all. If you're lucky after a year, you might get 8 days off. How many days off does Congress get?
I didn't even know they worked.
Good point. They're officially supposed to be at work. Well, actually, no, sorry. Vacation days for Congress this year are 239. And Eric, yes, that's the only time they're supposed to be at work. And Eric Cantor just released his calendar for the year. There is not a single week. He's the majority leader of the House. There's not a single week in his calendar. It's online. You can go check it out. That has a 5-day week in it. Nor a single weekend, by the way. So they've worked out how to be better off than medieval peasants. And while we are being sucked back into a world that is worse, not just in terms of our own humanity, but in terms of the natural world itself. And just to kind of conclude about how we rethink things, we currently live in a world based on 3 things, essentially, right? We produce things because they make money, and we produce those under competition, and for those reasons, we lack any real democracy. So what I would argue eco-socialism is the reverse of those 3 things. We want to live in a world that is based on production for the things that we need, which will be democratically decided by all of us, under conditions, so under real democracy, and based on real cooperation, actual cooperation, as opposed to competition. Because we know, I mean, I would be depressed if we didn't know what the answers are, or the technology didn't exist. But we know those things exist. It's entirely a social and political question, and so that's much more hopeful, right? Because we've overthrown tyranny and oppression and exploitation throughout human history. If there's one thing about human nature that is valid, you can definitely say a hatred of tyranny, oppression, and exploitation. We don't like those things, right? And we cooperate and work together in order to get rid of them. We are the vast majority. We are the 99%. And so as such, we can absolutely overthrow capitalism and begin to find out what it really means. Because you think about the insanity of capitalism. Does everybody really need their own car? Obviously not, for all the reasons I went into earlier. Do you actually need your own washer dryer, right, when it's in use for like, what, an hour a week or something? What happens if we had these communally held, and not owned by anybody, but the community works out how to do those things? What happens if we were only working 20 hours a week in socially useful jobs, which makes you happier and healthier and so on? We had a whole discussion about what it means to have fresh, nutritious food. What is it makes up a balanced diet? How should we treat animals? All the things that we never get a say in before. And I've mentioned this before, but you know, I've never heard anybody complain about libraries, right? Have you? Right? Right, exactly. Goddamn libraries. It's like they're everywhere. And so, you know, how do we expand that? No, you know, you're allowed to use books. You don't have to pay for them. You take them back. You have a conversation about them over dinner and whatever else, and we reestablish what it is to actually be human while overcoming. And the only way we're going to do that is through a mass movement, because what I'm talking about is how do we alter what it means to have a high quality of life. It's clearly not about accumulation of things like they tell us it is. It's about relationships between each other and between the earth upon which we depend. That is what it means to find out what it means to be human, which is why we need to learn so much from indigenous cultures. Right. And only under those conditions of a mass movement are we going to acquire the idea on a mass basis that we need an alternative way of thinking about what is a quality of life, which means that we'll also have to tackle questions of racism, sexism, sexuality, because we're also so distorted in all kinds of about our own sexual beings that we don't really even understand what that means to start with. And so I think there are so many questions that will open up that human nature and society will be able to blossom and go forward in a genuine way so that we can actually overcome some of the filth and degradation, all of it ultimately, that we've inherited from this disgusting system that should have been consigned to the dustbin of history a long time ago. And I'll just finish with one quote from Marx, if I may take 30 more seconds, because I think it's an absolutely important question. How did they end up with the land?
They stole it.
Right. Why do we have to go and beg to the banks to go into debt to them for 30 years to get the land back that was originally ours in the first place? And obviously indigenous people primarily. So I think, quoting from Marx, I think just to finish this is, I think, the connection between us right now and 7 generations into the future. From the standpoint of a higher economic form of society, private ownership of the globe by single individuals will appear quite as absurd as private ownership of one man by another. Even a whole society, a nation, or even all simultaneously existing societies taken together are not the owners of the globe. They are only its possessors, its usufructuaries. And like bona patris familias, good heads of household, they must hand it down to succeeding generations in an improved condition. And I think that that is our challenge and that is our task, and we need to build for the future. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chris. Thank all of you for coming. We have one more comment from one of the organizers, Mimi. There is an indigenous quote, "We are the people that we've been waiting for."
We just wanted to say one final thanks to Chris and Jill. They flew in from the East Coast for this conference. That's a big deal to come and spend the day with us and to lend their time. So big round of applause to them. I also think everybody it's been a long day. We stressed at the beginning of this conference the need for unity. We spent a lot of time together today, and it feels good. And I'd like to give everybody a round of applause. Let's give a round of applause for everybody here. And let's make this a start. This is just the start. We're collecting donations now, so if you get a chance, drop off a little bit.